Hello world of YouTube, and welcome to the next discography review, and one that I'm pretty excited to bring you guys. So if you notice on my social media, I didn't put out a poll to see what should be voted for next, and that's because when I put up the last poll on the Patreon, there was a heavier push to do this project. It didn't win, but there were comments to do this group next, and I figured, you know what? Yeah, they're a classic group that I've never talked about the discography of that had a huge impact on me growing up. And that is the Beastie Boys. Three Jewish dudes from New York doing some of the craziest fucking produced hip-hop of the 80s and 90s. I love the production. I think there's some, like, their production work is some of the most underrated in the genre, IMO. And I think it's because they put over that a bunch of, like, sarcastic comedy, joke stuff. Some of it hasn't aged the best, but as a whole, them as a group, three charismatic, energetic MCs with really good chemistry, and I think it helps that they started off as a band. They were a punk band that became a hip-hop trio, and I think they transitioned into that really well while integrating some of the punk stuff into their sounds incredibly well. And they were pioneers for a lot of ideas that went on in hip-hop, and I love them. I love these guys. I listened to them a lot growing up, and they helped kind of give my taste a lot of early injections of hip-hop. They were, again, one of the earlier groups I got into in the genre. I'm going to be talking about all of their records today, ranking them and giving you guys kind of a roadmap for those that have never really listened to the Beastie Boys. They're one of the more easier hip-hop groups to get into if you appreciate that old-school hip-hop mentality, because a lot of their rhyme schemes and bars aren't necessarily the most profound, because again, they lean a lot on comedy, but their dynamic is so different than a lot of people in hip-hop. A lot of call and response. People are kind of jumping in and out of the cut so, intermittently throughout a song. They were different. They were so different. They still, like, other groups have come and gone, but they never sounded like the Beastie Boys. And that's why they've continued to be one of the most notable groups in the genre. Now, the Beastie Boys had a different start to their career than their debut. They actually had a few punk EPs, some of which extended into the 90s, and I figured I'll talk about those right now in their own sort of section. Like I said, the two big EPs that stem from this era were the Pollywog Stew and the Agio e Olio. Now, out of these two EPs, my personal favorite is Agio e Olio. I think that the production on it is just a little bit better, but personally, I feel like listening to the Beastie Boys as purely a punk act is like watching a magician only do card tricks. It feels a little one-note, and it feels a little restrictive given the avenues that they explored later on in the career. I feel like if you like punk, you may not even like these EPs. I think that they're fine. I think that they work better when they're doing punk songs in tandem with doing their hip-hop stuff. But these are fine. They're nothing super groundbreaking or super forward-thinking in the genre of punk, but they're a nice little avenue if you enjoy the punkier moments on records like Ill Communication and Check Your Head. I feel like if you like those moments and you want to hear more of it, they've got two EPs ready in the wings waiting for you that I think you'll still get some enjoyment out of. Now, let's get to the album ranking proper. There are usually two albums put on the bottom of the Beastie Boys camp, and this is usually on the very bottom, and that's because it's an instrumental project. And well, it would make sense, because again, their production game, super underrated IMO, but this isn't the same type of instrumental you would expect from them. It's much more of like an instrumental rock project with hip-hop production, because it feels like a full experience. There's keys, there's bass, there's drums. Like, it feels like a funk group just putting together funky instrumentals. And that's fine, but the production isn't quite as, like, the engineering isn't quite as tight as it is on their regular-ass projects. But there's some cool stuff here. I love the groove on Beat For My Name. I love the bossa nova vibe on Suco de Tangeria. I like the keys on Freaky Hijiki and Off the Grid. I like the Electric Worms groove as well. There's some cool ideas on here. I just feel like that if you're wanting to get into the Beastie Boys, you don't even need to touch this record. Like, it's for curious fans, really, only. and for those that want to hear them do something purely instrumental. It's cool. It's a lot more laid back than you might expect from the Beastie Boys, but I dig it. It's chill. I could see myself maybe rapping over one of these someday, but no, I like it. I like the mix-up. It's solid enough as it is. Again, nothing super profound, nothing super amazing, but it's decent, if not held back by some repetitive moments, and again, that lackluster production that doesn't give everything enough pop.
On a scene for the people to like. You want peace for the people, then you say you're right.
Now, 2 the 5 Boroughs sits on the bottom of people's list for a completely different reason, and that's mostly because the production on this record isn't as interesting as the beats and production on the rest of their catalog. While this album feels more laser focused conceptually because this is a lot more political than any of their other projects. They really rally against George W. Bush on this project, which I don't blame them. I was never the biggest fan of him politically, but neither were the Beastie Boys, and they inject a lot of that into this project. And honestly, this record doesn't work because it's not a concept people really go to the Beastie Boys for. You know, the Beastie Boys have never really been super political up to this point in their career, and it could just be because they were getting older. This came out in 2004, and you could see them trying to kind of shed some of their party-tinged tendencies, even though that's pretty much the biggest thing people came to them for. It still has its moments, like the opener, Check It Out, was a huge single. It's a song that I really like the groove of. I like the sort of more laid-back production on 3 the Hard Way. I like the electronic tinge production that's on a lot of this. I think it's not as cool as what was on Hello Nasty, which had more electronic leanings, or on the album that followed after this, Hot Sauce Committee Part 2. I think the production on both these records are better. This feels more like an offshoot sound. It's almost like they're King of Limbs, if that makes any sense. Production-wise, it's a lot more focused in a way that detracts from some of the cooler ideas that would come to fruition on other projects of their career. I could see people getting turned off by the less super energetic flows, because it is a lot more laid back, because they're trying to focus more on topics. It's a fine record. I think that's my biggest issue with it as well. I don't go to them for this sort of stuff, and while I don't think it's misguided because they were New Yorkers in the 2000s, and I could see why people would get frustrated with politics in general at this time, but yeah, it's fine. I feel like it's more for people to cherry pick the songs that they do like, because if you really like the Beastie Boys or you want to get into them, you're going to be turned off by some of the stuff on here as well if you've listened to the rest of the catalog. Not a starting point, more a point of interest to cherry pick songs that you enjoy for them. Just listen to the singles, see if the production really sticks to you, and check out the rest at your own leisure. It's nothing super profound, but I think it's solid enough. This is going to sound weird after revealing what the next part in the ranking is, and that's already going to be kind of a hot take with some people. But I had a hard time choosing between what was going to be next, whether it was going to be this record or the next record in rotation, and while one was super detrimental to their career, Hot Sauce Committee Part 2 has aged incredibly well. I already loved this record a decent amount when it came out, and as time has gone on, I've just grown in appreciation for its sort of expansion on Hello Nasty's electro-infused sound by doubling down on that on tracks like the opener Make Some Noise, or the other big song from it, Too Many Rappers, or again the really fuzzy instrumental on Say It, that has a little more of a psychedelic edge to it, to the injections of punk back into their sound with Lee Majors Comes Again, or the traditional and hip-hop sound that is Here's a Little Something For Ya, or the fucking track Don't Play No Game That I Can't Win with Santa Gold. I adore that track and think that it's super well produced. This is everything that you would expect from a Beastie Boys release in some facet, just in such a tight listening experience. And it's funny, because this record and the next record are arguably their two tightest releases as far as consistency and pacing, but the thing that held this one back is partially because of the legacy of the next record, and because it's one that I have mass nostalgia for. But don't sleep on Hot Sauce Committee Part 2. I feel like it's hard for a catalog like the Beastie Boys to have an underrated record, but this is the perfect embodiment of it, if only because this is, again, if you want everything the Beastie Boys has done in their career in a tight, nice package, listen to Hot Sauce Committee. It's actually like a decent gateway into their catalog. It's not quite as rambunctious and juvenile as their early material, and that's one of the other things I like about it, is that it's a little more reflective. It has its energy, and it has some jovial sort of snark to it, but it's a little different. It's a little more aged. And I appreciate that. As a guy who grew up with these dudes, it was cool to see them sort of older and sort of embrace this maturity without losing that energy that catapulted them into success to begin with. Maybe start with this, or at least get to it if you like some of the sounds on Hello Nasty and, say, Check Your Head. If you like those records and you've listened to them and you want to hear a little more of a contemporary twist to that, listen to Hot Sauce Committee Part 2. It's either a good starting point for some people if you want something that just cuts some of the bullshit and gives you a tight experience, or if you want something that is a little more concise but you don't mind the broader strokes that they paint on their earlier work. Get to this eventually. Just do it.
Oh, yeah! That's me. I got faith and fucking...
Again, I don't know what kind of take this is, and I like License to Ill. It's a record that I grew up with big time. My mom spun a lot of this record when I was a kid. You know, I grew up with tracks like The New Style and Girls, and of course Fight for Your Right and No Sleep Till Brooklyn, which were colossal hits. Brass Monkey as well, a song that I've listened to an immense amount of times growing up. But as I get older, I just appreciate the sort of artistry that their career flourished into. I respect a lot of the ideas that this cemented in hip-hop, or at least further expanded on in hip-hop, with having fucking Kerry King from Slayer doing guitars on one of the tracks here. I like the heavy sample usage as well, with Rhymin' and Stealin' having a blatant sample of When the Levee Breaks by Led Zeppelin. The production on here is very vintage in sound, obviously. It's a product of 80s hip-hop, but I feel like it transcended some of the other acts of that era because its production is a little different. It's a little more forward-thinking to like late 80s, early 90s hip-hop, which I'll talk more about later on down the list. Don't you fucking worry about that. But this record's a decent start for the group, you know, and I think it has that juvenileness that, you know, was kind of associated with them ramped up to infinity because it's their first record. They talk about hooking up with girls, and they may say some verbiage that's not necessarily aged the best. I'd argue this record has aged the least well out of their whole catalog. It's a decent debut. You know, it's a really good debut. It has some catchiness. It has that same buoyancy and interesting kind of everyone weaves in and out of a bar flow that these guys have became known for. It just maybe has some songs that may have dated a little bit. But I still like a lot of this project. The New Style is up there for like one of my favorite Beastie songs. I like the production and Hold It Now, Hit It. Obviously, I like the Fight for Your Right and No Sleep Till Brooklyn kind of 1-2 punch on here. Like, it's a decent debut. If you want a good representation of early Beastie Boys, and again, a tight listening experience, this might actually be the best starting point. Because again, after this record, they get really lofty with ideas and how to handle pacing of a record. Some would argue a lot of their records after this are incredibly bloated. And I wouldn't necessarily disagree, but I appreciate the artistry on those records more than the artistry here. It's an album that I'm super nostalgic for still, and I feel like it's worth your time still, even if you may not like some of the verbiage that's on display in some of the tracks. Hello Nasty is the last truly great record they had ever made until they bounced back with Hot Sauce Committee, and injects a lot of electronic sounds, and it's a purely more hip-hop release out of the Beasties catalog, because even on License to Ill, they toyed with injecting rock, because they were a punk band at first, so having some of those punk ideals was really a huge through a majority of their catalog outside of one other instance that, again, I'm gonna get to it. But Hello Nasty has some incredibly tight grooves, some super psychedelic moments like Song for the Man and Just a Test and Me, which has this incredibly lush and warbly instrumental that I fucking love. But it has also those electro moments like Intergalactic, or some of the synth moves on Remote Control, or Body Movin'. And I feel like that melding of psychedelic ideals and electro-infused instrumentals really throttles the record and gives it this incredible sound that, while backed with a lot of the turntablism that's on here, gives it this super futuristic sound that I think really embodies a lot of what underground hip-hop would follow suit with following this and other acts of the late 90s like MF Doom. It's a super forward-thinking record to me that I feel like the only reason that sets it back is out of the pantheon of Golden Age Beastie Boys, this is the most bloated. Whether it be extended interludes or songs that kind of meander a bit, this is the most lofty of Beastie Boys projects, and that's what kind of holds it back to me personally. I think the sound set it above everything that's come before it, because I love the sounds of this record. One of the big reasons why I like the Beastie Boys, like I've said, is their production is super unique and different, especially, again, for what they started as and what was being carried out in trends of people in their ilk. It was just super different to me personally, and I enjoy it a lot. I enjoy a lot of their catalog, and I feel like this is it's a good record to get to. If you like Paul's Boutique, immediately after that, throw on Hello Nasty, because I feel like if you're a hip-hop fan and you like the production on Paul's Boutique, you will enjoy the production on here. This is a good next place to go, like in tandem with Hot Sauce Committee. Or if you started with Hot Sauce Committee and you want to hear something a little more lofty and ambitious, get to Hello Nasty. It's a good stepping stone record that they've made, and I feel like it's definitely still well worth your time. It's up there with some of the other records I'll get to that, as far as some of the best production of their career.
Track got it going on. Listen to the ladies, come on and let me spawn.
So while Ill Communication sees them harnessing a lot of the funk offshoots and punkier aspects of Check Your Head, I personally appreciate how Check Your Head was handled more. However, it is a good expansion on that record's sound. And like the last record I talked about, has some of my favorite instrumentals in hip-hop. From Sure Shots, Flute Loop on there, or the more funkier aspects that are really well produced, like Sabrosa, or Bobo on the Corner, or some of the more weirder aspects of that, like Shambhala. I like the punk energy that's still here on a couple tracks, like Tough Guy, and on the colossal singer Sabotage. This record still has a lot of the weird genre-bending embellishments that Beastie Boys had come to be known for at this point. It just harnessed it in a little more of a well-spread fashion, because they also have other traditional hip-hop songs like B-Boys Making to the Freak Freak, or Get It Together, which features Q-Tip on it, which is a cool sort of feature from Q-Tip. This is a great record, though, honestly. Like, if you enjoyed Check Your Head, or if you've enjoyed some of the more rockier aspects of their debut, and you want to hear those fleshed out a little bit more, listen to Ill Communication. It's a good sort of offshoot of those two record sounds in a good way. I really love it. I like a lot of the attitude that's on here, and I like a lot of the iconic moments that are on here as well. It's a fucking bop. It's the shirt I've been wearing this whole time. It's Check Your Fucking Head time. I like this record more, but I can see the argument being made for Ill Communication being their better release. However, I love the production on this record more. I love that the bass pops so much better on the funky moments. From Funky Boss's bass to Gratitude's opening bass line. The classic So What You Want's production. I love the punk song, the bigger punk song on here, Time for Living More. I like the instrumentals on Finger Lickin' Good, and the opener, Jimmy James, Pass the Mic's weird instrumental is fucking dope. I love Stand Together's bizarre-ass instrumental that sees them exploring some odd-ass sounds. This record is much weirder than Ill Communication, and feels like this weird place for them to go after Paul's Boutique, but it's what set the precedent for the decade to follow. It showed that the Beastie Boys weren't just this snotty punk band that injected rock ideals into hip-hop, or these frat boy, mentality dudes from that record and just made in-your-face aggro shit. Sure, they go hype over some mellow-ass instrumentals on here, like on some of the tracks I mentioned, like Gratitude's sort of laid-back beat that falls into an organ, which the organ plays throughout this record as like a key sound that I also really, really love. they bring it back a little bit. They scale it back. They pull together some more laid back sounds on here as well that I feel like helped flourish their sounds into more avenues and gave them a sort of precedent for them to expand upon. While the next record that I'll be talking about is much more indebted to hip hop and was like a piece of its time because of what it did in its time. They sought out to expand in other ways because of the law, and this record is a great sort of answer to Paul's Boutique's ambition in a different way. I adore Check Your Head. I think that it is full of some cool ass sounds, some great ideas that I feel like gave the band longevity in a way that wouldn't have existed if it weren't this quality. I feel like this is a really good starting point for the band as a whole. You know, while it's not as tight as License to Ill or Hot Sauce Committee, it has a lot of ideas that are still even more explored on Hot Sauce Committee. It is just a fundamental classic in my eyes. I love Check Your Head. I think that it is, again, one of those hip-hop records that I feel like was important to at least the group in giving them longevity. But maybe that's just me. But this is for sure a decent starting point, given it has some vignettes, some interludes that are also a big part of the Beastie Boys catalog, at least in the 90s, and I feel like is the most important piece of the discography. Sans Paul's Boutique is a classic across the board. It has this very loose structure that interweaves cool just production embellishments in with catchy ass songs like Shake Your Rump and Shad Ratch. It has incredible sample-laden and fill production like on High Plains Drifter, The Sound of Science, and Car Thief. It has the B-Boy Bouillabaisse suite, which has some fucking weird-ass sounds in it. This technically is like the foundation for their career to expand upon, even though they drew a lot more from License to Ill as time went on. This record and the response this record got legally because of all the sample-based production more acted as the foundation for the response the band would make in the coming decade. But this record is my favorite because it's just, its production is so fucking cool. I'm a big fan of sample-based production. I love early De La Soul. I love this record for doing the same thing. Same with Biz Markie. I have a lot of respect for Biz Markie because of his huge piece of that scene. And I honestly love this record because it has, its focus isn't the same focus that License to Ill's was. It does have its catchier moments like the ones I mentioned, or the hook on Johnny Royale. It's more about creating a sound, creating an atmosphere that feels very indebted to East Coast production in a very vintage but perfect sort of way. I love this, the overall vintage feel of it that feels so perfect. That hey on Shad Ratch is perfectly fit into that cut. There's so much like fucking chemistry going on sonically on this project that creates this cocktail of just sonic brilliance. And I feel like it, in tandem with records like 3 Feet High and Rising, are some of the most important records to hip-hop's foundation. And I feel like this is a good starting point for like purists in hip-hop, because I could see why people may not like Check Your Head and Ill Communication for having these more injections of punk, but this is a much more hip-hop focused project, and I feel like if you like hip-hop and you've never listened to Paul's Boutique for some reason, listen to it. You know, it is still one of the best produced hip-hop. This is one of my favorite hip-hop projects of all time. I'm a big fan of Paul's Boutique. You know, I think that it's again, it has some of the spacey ideas that would be expanded upon more on like Hello Nasty and Hot Sauce, without all of the other sort of lofty ideas that coded the records that I just talked about prior. And I feel like if you like License to Ill, those records are a better jumping off point from that. But if you like hip hop at its core, I would listen to Paul's Boutique and bend around the discography at your leisure. It's a classic. It is genre defining, and it is the best Beastie Boys record. Not by a large margin, but by a margin. And that was my Beastie Boys discography review. What did you think about it? Did you like it? Did you not? let me know in those comments down below and give it a like if you did in fact like it. If you want to see more of my music, gaming, and general nerdery content, be sure to subscribe. Special thanks to my patrons if you would like to take that next step and join their ranks to get early access to content, exclusive content like my Patreon cut of my Eminem reformatted discography review, which went live earlier this week. It is linked in the description. And you also help drive the community because, like I said in the beginning, this was a more push toward one on the Patreon, so I figured I'd do it next. But either way, I'm going to get out of here. Thank you again so very much for watching. I have been Viral Rack. You guys take videos, live situations, and I'll see you another day.